Well, my name is Carol Lee Krieger, and I moved here to Santa Barbara with my family in 1972. In 1973, there was a moratorium declared in Montecito, where I live, and because of a water shortage. And everyone was given allocations according to what they had used in the previous 3 years. Now, since we hadn't lived here, we got a very small allocation. And I'm a native from Hawaii, and I love gardening. So all of our fights in our family were about water. And I realized from my activism in Hawaii that it was very important to have an issue to understand how it affected where I lived. In Hawaii, for example, the development had gone on unchecked, and I could see the result of this beautiful place that I had lived in as a child was just getting wrecked. And I didn't want the same thing to happen to Santa Barbara. So I vowed to myself back in 1973 that when my kids were grown, I would do something that could help keep Santa Barbara the place that I wanted to live in, and that I hoped, for the future of all of us. So it became evident to me with the moratorium that water was key in California. And I slowly realized that most of the water fell in Northern California, but most of the demand from the people was in Southern California. I didn't realize till later that it's not the people that is the biggest consumer of water in California, it's agriculture. And by far, corporate agriculture is 80% of that agriculture. And all agriculture uses 80% of the developed water in California, and to this day, today, only provides 2% of the gross domestic product. I figured that was something the public had to understand this, because they're told that it's the population growth that's driving all the water demand, and that's not true. Absolutely not true. Now, people do use water, but 13% of the total consumed water is a far cry from 80%. So when Governor Brown, during the height of this most recent drought, decided that the urban sector, the people, had to cut back 25%, but there were no cutbacks for agriculture, I thought that was really unfair, wrong, and very bad planning. So to get back to your question, Tim, the reason, my activism, I had that from 1973 in the back of my head, raised my kids and have had a great life here. But in about the late 80s, 1980s, the State Water Project came back on the ballot for the second time in Santa Barbara. And the first time was in 1979, and I wasn't very active in that campaign, but I was very interested, but I was too busy raising the kids. But that campaign, they told the truth about the State Water Project, that it couldn't deliver but maybe 50% of the promises, and that it was going to be expensive. And it lost by 70%. When the truth was told to the voters, they were smart enough to figure it out, and they voted it down. So come this next drought in the late 80s and in 1990, state water was back on the ballot, but this time the proponents of state water did not tell the truth. They lied about the cost. They said it would be $270 million, and we know it is costing us $1.76 billion. That's a big lie. And they said all over the ballot measures that it was 97% reliable. That's a big lie too. We know from what we have actually used, it's only 36% reliable. And in drought, as in 2014, only 5%. Yet Santa Barbara is on the hook every year because it passed in 1991. We're on the hook every year for $60 million, whether we get a drop of water or not. That's a take or pay contract, which is a very important thing to remember. When anyone is involved in a take or pay contract, it means that you have to pay the fixed cost whether you get any of the product or not. In this case, it's water. So we're now past the election in 1991, and in 1995, it became clear that something was going on at the State Water Project. And I was the co-chair of the Santa Barbara Citizens Planning Association at that time. I'd been made the co-chair in 1991, right after the election, where we lost, and the State Water Project and the desal plant were voted in. And so I was attending meetings in Buellton of the Central Coast Water Authority, which is the agency that was put together. It's a joint powers authority, and it was put together to build Santa Barbara's hookup to the State Water Project. That hookup runs from Kettleman City in Kern County through San Luis Obispo to Lake Cachuma. It's 144 miles. And it was done in two sections, and this is really important for what's going on actually right now. The first section was revenue bonds that were backed by the state of California, the Department of Water Resources. And that went from Kern County to the Santa Maria River. And Santa Maria, the city of Santa Maria, is the largest entity to take water in the State Water Project in our county. So they have the biggest share of that part of the aqueduct. And then, but Santa Maria, because it's taking it at the Santa Maria River, it didn't need to pay for getting it from the Santa Maria River to Lake Cachuma. That is known as the local section of the pipeline. That was entirely paid for by the South Coast Water Agencies and a very small amount by some very small other agencies like Solvang. But primarily think of it as the debt for the South Coast agencies. Now, so that was in place, and then in 1995, some amendments to the State Water Project surfaced at the Central Coast Water Authority meeting, and I was the only member of the public there. These were known as the Monterey Amendments, and that story was just, it's absolutely, horrifying to me what they were trying to do. In secret, in Monterey, California, 5 of the State Water Project contractors and the Central Coast Water Authority, this our local joint powers authority, met in secret. And it was all orchestrated by an attorney, local attorney in town named Stan Hatch, who had been the force behind the election, both in '79, where he learned that the only way he could win was to lie, and in '91, where his lies paid off and he won for what he was trying to do. So these amendments, when they surfaced in Buellton at the Central Coast Water Authority, were far-reaching. They were going to begin the process of privatizing the State Water Project, turning over a huge state asset, the Kern Water Bank, to the control of Stuart Resnick and Paramount Farms, a private individual. And all of these were done in secret, and they were going to try to slip them under the rug, basically, get them approved way back here in Podunk, Buellton. So I'm so glad I was there to get a copy of these amendments. And I was very inexperienced. I'm not a trained lawyer or anything, but I'm an activist. And so what I did was I took this home and made 50 copies of it and started sending them everywhere. And I convened a meeting in the carport of my garage and had activists from all over California attend. It's where I met Dorothy Green, who was the founder of Heal the Bay, and Mike Jackson, who happened to be in town. He's an attorney from Quincy, California. And Mike is still a part of CWIN today. And Dorothy was a founding member with me. But they were appalled when they started reading what these amendments would do. And so Mike Jackson helped us to organize to sue DWR on these amendments. And it took us from 1995, Citizens Planning Association, Plumas County, and the Planning and Conservation League. It took us until the year 2000 to wend our way through the courts, but we won at the 3rd District Court of Appeal in September of 2000. That was the moment I knew that I could make a difference, and it gave me so much hope to really, get in there. Just as a citizen, I could make a difference. I had. Then, to my horror, our attorney was taken in by the current head of the Planning and Conservation League and settled the case. So I was just horrified, because for a paltry $5 million, we lost basically all the ground we had gained in our win at the 2nd District Court of Appeal. But we did preserve the right to force DWR to do a new environmental impact report on the Monterey Amendments. And it was at that time that I left Citizens Planning Association and the settlement and the whole thing and started CWIN, because I wanted a viable plaintiff to sue again when the time was right. And that's exactly what we've done. So CWIN was formed in 2001, and Yvonne Chenard of Patagonia was a co-founder, Mike Jackson, Dorothy Green, myself. I've been working with these folks now for many, many, many years, and our mission is the same. It's to protect California's water for the environment and the people. And it's very simple. You just have to be persevering. So then fast forward to 2010, the Monterey Amendment case did come back. DWR did submit a new environmental impact report, and we did sue. And we're still wending our way through the courts, but I have every hope that we will get the Kern Water Bank back for the public, because that's the most logical and best place to store water, the public's water, urban water, south of the Delta, in order to protect the Delta. In this process, I started in my backyard basically, and I knew that I needed more water than my allocation was in 1973. And it broadened to the county, well, first to Montecito, where I lived, my water district, and then to the county of Santa Barbara with the State Water Project fight in the early 90s, and then to the whole state with the Monterey fight in 1995. And I have stayed at the state level ever since. And CWIN was formed to protect and advocate for everyone. And so that's our mission, our goal, and that's what we're doing. It wasn't until maybe 2005 that I began to understand that the state had overpromised in their contracts just how much water there was in the system. So we started asking at the State Water Resources Control Board. And I want to step back just a little bit. The State Water Resources Control Board is the agency in California that has the fiduciary duty to grant and revoke all water rights permits in California. This is really important. And there was a big fight to create the State Water Resources Control Board. I'm going to go back in history just a little bit. The fight over water started with the gold miners in the 1860s. They were using water cannons and arsenic to separate the gold from the whatever it was they were trying to mine. And it was poisoning everything, and it was just causing a lot of trouble. So there was lots of litigation and stuff, and then that settled down. There were senior water rights lawsuits that had started at that point. Then in the 1870s and 80s and 90s, it was the cattle barons, Miller and Lux, and there were a few more, who were trying to grab all the water rights on the rivers. So there was a lot of litigation about that too. Senior water rights and appropriative water rights and riparian water rights were all big topics for at the end of the 19 or the 1800s and the beginning of the 1900s. And there was a seminal case that happened, and I don't remember the exact date, but it was Miller and Lux versus, and I can't remember, but I'll find that. And what that case said is that riparian water rights holders, folks who lived next to a stream or a body of water, a lake, had first priority for that water. Appropriators, meaning people who said that they, claimed a specific amount of water from a river or a lake, but didn't live close. They had to take that water away. They're appropriators. What this lawsuit did was it very clearly said that the riparian water rights holders are the most senior water rights holders. That was a huge fight to get that to happen. Appropriators are next, and they are depending on when their appropriation was finalized. And there was a lot of fighting over all that. So it wasn't until 1914 that the first version of the State Water Resources Control Board was actually formed to help sort all of this out. Who owned what water and how much was there? Because some of the riparian water rights holders were claiming the entire river, which of course is ridiculous. So that's when the concept of beneficial use came into being, and it became clear that if a riparian water rights holder had a right to water, they must use it on their land, and it couldn't be exported for profit, because that was what was starting to drive a lot of this stuff. They wanted to sell it and make money.